I never thought a single pearl could destroy everything I believed about the woman I loved, or that the same pearl would be the only thing standing between her life and death. It started in the forest. I was young, reckless, the kind of prince who believed courage was the same thing as wisdom. My father, King Verbudra, had raised me to be fearless. I wore that fearlessness like armor. What I didn't understand yet, what no one tells you when you're young and proud, is that fearlessness without patience will walk you straight into the worst mistake of your life. We had been hunting. The deer escaped. My men wanted to turn back, and I agreed. But as I turned my horse around, something caught my eye beneath an ancient tree. A pearl, sitting there in the middle of the jungle floor, like it had been waiting for me specifically. It glowed with a light that had no business existing in that dark, dense forest. My soldier warned me. He said it quietly, carefully. Where does a pearl come from in the middle of a jungle? I laughed at him. I was Siddharth, son of Verbudra. I didn't fear warnings. I picked it up. I brought it to my father like a child showing off a gold star. He loved it. He had it embedded in his throne, said its light would illuminate the court every single day. And it did. That pearl sat in the throne and glowed, and none of us understood what we were really keeping inside our walls. She came the very next morning. Her name was Kaya. She stood in the middle of the royal court in torn clothes, holding a small green parrot on her shoulder, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Large dark eyes, long hair, a quietness about her that felt more like depth than shyness. She said she had no one, no family, no home. She asked for work, just something small, just a place to belong. My heart moved before my mind could stop it. I told my father immediately, let her tend the royal gardens. He agreed. And so Kaya walked into my world. For weeks I found every excuse to wander into the gardens. I told myself I was checking on the flowers. I told myself it was routine. But we both knew the truth. She had a way of speaking, careful, measured, like every word was chosen deliberately, and her parrot would announce my arrival every single time with that ridiculous cheerful voice. The prince is here. The prince is here. It made the gardeners laugh. It made me feel something I hadn't felt before. I fell in love with her. I know how that sounds. A prince, a garden girl. But love doesn't care about those boundaries. It finds you where you are and asks what you're going to do about it. I decided I was going to do something about it. I walked up to her one afternoon while the parrot sat silent on its perch, and I told her exactly what I felt. I told her I wanted to marry her. She said no. Not rudely, not coldly. She said it with something that looked like pain, like she wanted to say yes, and something was stopping her. I asked why. She said she couldn't tell me. I pushed. She turned and walked away. 3 days I stayed in my room. 3 days I didn't appear in court, didn't eat properly, didn't speak to anyone. My father finally summoned me. I told him everything. And my father, who was a king before he was a father, did what kings do. He sent for Kaya. She stood before the entire court. My father asked her, firmly, why she had refused his son. She stood with her head bowed and said nothing. My father's patience wore thin fast. He gave the order. The soldier raised a sword. And then the pearl on the throne exploded with light. Not a glow, not a shimmer. Lightning. Actual lightning cracking out of that pearl as the sword swung toward Kaya's neck. The soldiers stumbled back. Everyone froze. The pearl pulsed again and again, like a heart beating in panic, like something alive screaming stop. My father stared at it, then at Kaya. Then, very slowly, he lowered the execution order. That was the moment she spoke. She told us there was a second pearl, deep in a forest called the Forest of Dreams, Kwaban Ka Jungle. She said that if the second pearl was brought to her, she would explain everything. Both pearls. Both secrets. And she would agree to marry me. I didn't let her finish. I volunteered before the last word left her mouth. My father begged me not to go. I was his only child. The forest was dangerous, not in the ordinary way, but in a way that nobody could fully explain. Kaya herself walked me to the entrance. Before I stepped through the great stone arch that marked the border of that strange place, she took my hand for just a second. She said, "Everything in there is real to the eye, but not always real in truth. Every step will show you two things. One is honest. One is a lie. You must learn to see the difference." She gave me her parrot and let me go. Inside, the world was wrong in a beautiful way. Flowers too vivid to be natural. Waterfalls that vanished when touched. I reached for one, and it dissolved the moment my fingers broke the surface. The parrot clicked its beak. "Remember what she told you." I walked deeper. Two rivers appeared, one fire, one water. They ran parallel, identical in width, almost mirror images of each other. My instinct screamed water, but I stopped. I thought, fire is real. Fire burns. Fire doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It's the water that might be the trick, the comfortable option, the familiar one, the one your mind reaches for without thinking. I stepped into the fire. It turned to water beneath my feet. Cool, clean, real. The river of water I had almost stepped into ignited, roaring flames curling up where the current had been. I crossed to the other side and kept walking. Then I saw two women. One young, impossibly beautiful, holding a plate of sweet halwa, smiling at me with the kind of smile that feels manufactured. One old, bent at the back, holding a dry, hard piece of bread, watching me with tired, honest eyes. Both of them beckoned. Every nerve in my body wanted to walk toward the beautiful one. That's the whole trap, isn't it? We always want the beautiful option. I walked toward the old woman and ate the dry bread. She transformed instantly, youth flooding back into her skin, her back straightening, her whole presence filling with quiet power. She pointed down a corridor I hadn't seen before. "The second pearl is that way." At the end of the corridor sat two things side by side. A pearl, brilliant white, luminous, clearly extraordinary. And beside it, a plain ordinary stone, dull and small and unremarkable. I almost laughed, almost reached for the pearl. But I knew the pattern by now. I knew this forest. Everything that looked like the answer was the trick. I picked up the stone. The pearl vanished. The stone blazed to life in my palm, transforming into something more beautiful than the pearl had ever appeared. I held it carefully all the way back, through the dissolving forest, through the arch, back to Kaya waiting on the other side. When I placed it in her hands, she didn't say thank you the way people usually do, quickly, reflexively. She held it against her chest and closed her eyes. Then she opened them and said, "You didn't just bring me a pearl. You brought back something I'd given up on." And then she told me everything. She wasn't a garden girl. She was a fairy, a real one, from a real place beyond the world I knew. She had come to the forest once, young and careless and full of laughter, picking flowers and throwing them at her friends. She had noticed the sage in meditation beneath one of the trees until flowers were already falling on his head, again and again, breaking years of his concentrated silence. He cursed her, not out of cruelty, out of injury. She had shattered 2 years of his spiritual work. His curse was proportional. She would live 2 years as an ordinary human woman alone, without her powers, without her world. If she survived, truly survived, not just physically but morally, with her soul intact, she could return home. To protect her during those 2 years, the sage himself had placed her life force inside the pearl and hidden it beneath that tree in the forest. The pearl I had picked up, which meant the moment I lifted it, her life came with me. She had no choice but to follow it. Follow me. Into my palace, into my life, into my heart, though she would never admit, even later, how willingly she had followed once she realized what kind of man I was. We were married, and our life was good in the way that real life is good, imperfect, warm, constantly surprising. We had a son. We named him Deepak. He was everything, loud and stubborn and curious and completely, absolutely everything. And when he was born blind, we both carried that grief quietly, each of us protecting the other from the full weight of it. What I didn't know was what Kaya had done. On a night I wasn't watching, she had used the second pearl, the one I had risked my life to retrieve, the one that contained her fairy powers, and she had channeled every drop of that magic into our son's eyes. Just like that, without telling me, without asking for anything in return. She simply gave away the source of her power because our child couldn't see. Deepak opened his eyes one morning and the world came rushing in. I celebrated. I held my son up in the light and felt something so complete I thought it might be the closest a human gets to perfection. And I didn't know what it had cost her. Didn't know what she had silently surrendered. Then, on the morning of Deepak's 8th birthday, a snake bit me in the garden. I remember the pain, the sudden, violent wrongness of it spreading up my arm. Then darkness. When I came back to myself, I was lying in the palace, and the royal physician was standing over me with an expression I recognized. The expression of someone choosing their words carefully because the truth is too heavy. The venom was too advanced. There was nothing more to be done.
I didn't see what happened next.
I was unconscious, but Deepak told me later, haltingly, because he didn't fully understand what he had witnessed. He said his mother held him. She asked him to close his eyes. He felt something leave him, like a warmth being pulled slowly out of his chest. And then she turned and faced me and released it. I woke up. Deepak couldn't see. My father saw it happen. His face told me everything before his words could. And by then, the story was already shaped. A witch, a sorceress, a woman who had stolen our son's sight with her own hands in front of witnesses. My father was furious. His voice shook when he spoke. And I listened to him instead of her.
She tried to speak.
I heard her say, but listen to me, and I cut her off. I said things I cannot fully repeat. I told her I had never imagined she was capable of this. I told her I had been fooled, that the woman I loved had been a lie all along. I told her to leave and never come back. She left without another word. That silence should have told me everything. Innocent people argue. Innocent people beg and plead and swear and cry. Kaya simply looked at me for one long moment, not with anger, not with hatred, but with something worse, a deep, resigned sadness, like she had always known this moment might come and had chosen to love me anyway. And then she walked out of the palace. The days that followed were the heaviest of my life. Deepak sat in corners. He didn't cry. He was 8 years old, and he had stopped crying, which is the saddest thing a child can do. The palace was full of people and completely empty at the same time. Then her mother arrived. I didn't know fairies had mothers until one appeared in the middle of the royal court in a flash of soft white light, composed and ancient, and entirely done with my nonsense before I had even opened my mouth. She was the queen of fairies. She had come for her daughter. When I told her Kaya was gone, told her why, she looked at me with an expression I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget. Not anger.
Pity.
The kind of pity that tells you exactly what kind of fool you've been. She explained the second pearl slowly, the way you explain something to someone who should have already understood but didn't. The pearl had contained Kaya's powers. Those same powers had been poured into Deepak's eyes at birth. And when the venom was killing me, when every physician had given up, Kaya had made a calculation that no person should ever have to make. She pulled her own gift back out of her son's eyes and pushed it into me. She chose me.
She always chose me.
And I had thrown her out. I didn't wait. I didn't pause for dignity or composure. I took soldiers and rode hard toward the forest, toward the tree, because some part of me already knew. Of course she would go back to where it started. Of course she would sit beneath the tree where her life had been hidden and where, for just a moment, everything had still been possible. She was there. She looked up when she heard the horses. She didn't run, didn't hide. Just watched me climb down and walk toward her with the expression of someone who has made peace with something. And when I finally stood in front of her and tried to speak, the words I had prepared meant nothing.
There was no speech.
There was only me kneeling in the dirt of that forest floor, asking her to come home.
She was quiet for a long time.
Then her parrot, who had apparently been sitting in the tree above her the entire time, said brightly, "The prince is here." She laughed. Actually laughed, the first real sound I had heard in days that wasn't grief. And in that laugh was something that felt like forgiveness, though I knew I hadn't earned it yet. I knew it would take time. Rebuilding trust always does. But she stood up and she walked beside me back to the horses, and that was enough. When we returned to the palace, her mother was waiting. On the evening of Deepak's birthday, the birthday that had nearly become a funeral, the fairy queen knelt before her grandson and touched his face. She gave him back his sight as a gift, clean and whole and permanent. Deepak opened his eyes and looked at his mother and said simply, "There you are." That night, the court that had been prepared for celebration finally celebrated. And sitting in the middle of it all, watching my son run between the lanterns, I thought about the pearl still embedded in my father's throne, still glowing, still quietly holding its secret. It had saved her life once. It had, in its way, saved mine. A pearl picked up carelessly by a reckless prince who thought he was brave, but was only lucky enough to wander into a story that chose to end well despite everything he did to ruin it. The hardest wisdom isn't learned in dream forests or royal courts. It's learned in the moment after you've said the unforgivable thing to someone who only ever loved you, and they choose, against all reason, to come back anyway. Some people find the pearl by accident. What matters is what you do with it once you understand what it actually is.